Okay, it looks like we have a good amount of folks here. We do have a lot of content to go through. So I think I'm going to get started. Is Anna, Sarah, you think that's okay? Awesome. Okay. So thank you all so much for being here. I um, am Naomi. I'm going to be your facilitator for today's training. We will be taking some time to go through logic models, what they are, why they're important, and how to create some metrics for your programs. So before we get started, I just want to do a little bit of a Zoom refresher. I know that we've all been using Zoom quite a bit over the last couple of years, but just in case, you have your mute button on the left-hand side. Right next to that is your video. Feel free to be on or off camera. It's up to you. And then, of course, we have the chat bubble in the middle of the menu. Feel free to ask questions in the chat. Anna is going to be monitoring the chat, and then we'll have some different designated time for questions, in which I'll be trying to answer some questions in the chat, and you can also unmute yourself and ask questions. Okay, so our plan for today, oops, excuse me, here's our agenda for today. As I mentioned, there is quite a bit of content to get through. However, I think we will definitely have time, as well as some time for you all to practice. We have some introductions, then we'll discuss what is a logic model. Then we'll take some time to talk about 3 aspects of a standard logic model: goals, resources, and activities. Then we'll head into breakout groups, and you all will work together to create your own, start creating your own logic models. And then we'll take a break for 10 minutes. Then we will discuss some results-based accountability, 2 more aspects of a logic model: outcomes and outputs. Then we'll have a partner spotlight with more than words. And then we'll discuss some baseline metrics. We'll have 10 minutes for questions, another 10-minute break, then some breakout groups, more questions, and then a survey. Depending on how many questions there are, we may have some additional time for questions, but feel free to, again, engage in the chat as much as you feel comfortable. All right, so we're gonna do some introductions today. I'm gonna ask you all to introduce yourselves. Just come off of mute and say your name, your pronouns, and why you decided to join today's training. I'll start us off. My name is Naomi. My pronouns are she, they, and I really I'm the facilitator, so of course I have to join, but I really love teaching people about logic models and developing logic models, because I find that it is a tool that just has such immense return on investment for organizations. You can use it in so many different contexts, from onboarding to program planning, budgeting, grants. And I find that once organizations go through this process, there's a lot more clarity and consensus within the organization and amongst the clients that they serve. And so, yeah, that's why I love talking about logic models. That's why I'm here today. So I think it's okay for us to popcorn. Anyone can kind of just get off of mute and start us off. Just share your name, pronouns, and why you decided to join today's training.
Hey everyone, my name is Katanace Bass. Happy to be here. She, her are my pronouns. I am a program manager for an organization that works on homelessness and working with folks in schools who are considered homeless. So just really looking forward to learning about, some tools to evaluate how we're doing, and just be able to show our progress or any learning lessons.
Awesome, thank you. Don't be shy.
Hi, good morning. My name is Jonathan Regis. I'm Program Director at Youth Harbors. My pronouns are he, him, his. And, I believe the effective application of logic model does really help an organization, program, really keep track of what we're doing, in terms of the activities and what we hope to accomplish through all the things, actions we're taking, and partners and client services that we're, directing towards those outcomes. I think it's really important.
Thanks for joining.
Hi, everybody. My name is Anna Scher. She, her, hers. I'm with the Office of Workforce Development and was involved in planning these trainings. And one of the reasons that we really gravitated towards doing a training on logic models and focusing on this topic was to really make sure there was some additional support and information for organizations to use this as a tool for strategic planning and really be able to incorporate logic models into the day-to-day and operations and use it to really help support the work and not just be something kind of separate from that. So yeah, really excited to get to participate.
Good morning, everyone. Diana Pichardo, pronouns are she, hers. I work with ESAC Boston. Fairly new working with the youth. So I just thought it was really interesting to learn more about the logic models.
Hi, my name is Ketsia Blanc. My boss, my supervisor, thought this would be a great opportunity, and so that's what brought me here. And I do have work with the youth and with other community groups, so I thought this would be very interesting Zoom to join. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Brian McCarthy. I'm from Break Time. You see him pronouns, and I joined today. We're a newer organization. I think everything that we're doing is kind of new, and I think are always interested in learning more. And I think as we've developed our logic model and begun to pressure test it and see how we evaluate it, I think we're always eager to see how we can do things more, better, different.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Genesis Bautista. I'm the Director of Youth Development at Mothers for Justice and Equality. And I use she, her pronouns. And I'm here today. I've done logic models quite a bit, but I'm looking to strengthen my abilities. I think it can be a pretty confusing topic, and everyone does it very differently. So I'm excited to just see what I can take away from today's session.
My name is Hope. I use she, her pronouns. I'm also from Break Time, but I'm also a student studying social work. And I've primarily been working one-on-one with young adults in our program, but I'm really interested in kind of this, back end side of program stuff. So I'm excited to learn a lot today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Guevara. I am from More Than Words. Outside of being the organizational spotlight today, I also really enjoy logic models. I feel that it's really helpful to have a clear program framework that you can be intentional and really strategic about the growth in your organization.
I am Jonathan Macrez, Deputy Director at Youth Options Unlimited Boston. I'm excited to join this group because logic models I do think can be used not only organization-wise, but also just within individual initiatives, and it can help people for planning, accountability, and direction. So happy to be here, and my pronouns are he, him, his. Thank you.
I'm Michaela Woodbury, Program Ambassador Recruitment for Break Time. I wanted to join as I thought this would be a great thing to learn. Just as my colleagues have said, we're a newer program, so being able to learn this information that we can bring back to our team is great.
Hi, my name is Deandra Williams. I'm the career counselor at Boston Public Libraries. I decided to join today's training similar to Genesis because I've used like different metrics and ways of presenting data and sharing it and seeing how it works, but particularly because the career program workforce development initiative in itself of being broader is now going to be at multiple branches. And so because this is very new and I'm a part of like kind of spearheading and shaping it, I'm interested in learning different ways to present data and to make like an ever-seeing flow, right, of like what it is that we're doing and how we hope to achieve goals. So yeah. Oh, and I use the feminine suite.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Sarui. I'm with the Office of Workforce Development. We're sponsoring the training today. And the reason one of the motivations for putting on this training is that we've heard a lot from our grantees that, they are interested in more training on logic models and especially on how to construct baseline, how to construct metrics for their logic models. And many of the organizations that are here today serve youth who sort of straddle multiple human service systems. So there's an added sort of level of complexity in thinking about, the sort of thresholds for outcomes, the metrics for outcomes and outputs. And especially it's more complex when grantors don't give you that information and you have to construct it yourself. So that was one of the motivations for developing today's training.
Hey everybody, my name's Diego. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the AmeriCorps Fellow at Fenway Community Development Corporation. I'm on the community programs team, and I think we're always trying to find new ways to engage with our community members and residents and develop programs that really enrich their lives and help them empower themselves. And I think logic models, I don't know much about them, but I'm excited to learn about them and see if they can be applied to those processes that we use. So thank you.
Okay, anyone else that we missed? We joined late, we're doing introductions, name, pronouns, and why did you decide to join today?
Hi, my name is Mary Garrity. I'm the HR manager at the Boys and Girls Clubs of Dorchester. And I'm only going to be able to join for the first hour, but we just engaged with break time. So we wanted to get a better handle on that. So.
Hi, my name is Tanya Robinson. I go by the feminine pronouns, and I am a recent hire of Youth Options Unlimited. And I'm the Assistant Deputy Director of Case Management of Youth Case Management and Recruitment. And I felt that this training would be definitely provide a lot of insight and information that would be beneficial for my new position.
Hi, my name is Trisha Chappell, and I'm with the Boys and Girls Club of Dorchester as well. And I apologize, I'm driving right now, so my connection is in and out, but just interested in learning more about the logic model. Don't know a lot about it, so looking forward to the session. And I'll be at a laptop in a minute.
No problem. All right, I think we got everyone. Last call. All right. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. I'm super excited for today, and I really hope that you all have some helpful takeaways after today's training. All right, so first we're going to discuss a little bit about what a logic model is. And essentially, a logic model is a systemic visual way to plan a program. It can serve as a foundation for program planning and evaluation, and it is a picture of why and how you believe a program will work. Oftentimes when you're looking at a logic model, it can be a little bit confusing to really understand what is the purpose, why is it set up the way it is, and essentially the goal is for the logic model to identify the steps that lead from specific activities to specific outcomes. And so each aspect, each component and segment of a logic model should flow into the next. Your resources should specifically correlate into your activities, and then your activities should specifically correlate to your outcomes and your outputs, and then your outputs to your outcomes. You'll hear me say that a lot throughout this training because I really want you all to understand that it's really everything in the logic model should be connected so that you are working towards your overarching goal. You can collect data at each step of a logic model, and evaluators can identify what went wrong if an intervention fails to meet its ultimate objectives. That's one of the reasons why it's so important for each segment of a logic model to flow into the other. It's because if there is, for whatever reason, a metric that was not met, we can oftentimes take a look at what our activities were, what resources that we actually had to pinpoint where things may have went wrong and start to have a discussion around how we can course correct. And then, of course, a logic model also helps you move from evaluation into action. So this is an example of a standard logic model. It's very standard. The terminology and segments in a logic model can vary, but this visual includes the core components of a logic model. So you have your goal, your resources, activities, outputs, and then outcomes or impact. And logic models can be very extensive. You may have seen logic models that have some other additional segments to them or are quite long, right? They can be several pages long. But for the purposes of today, we want to make sure that you have a clear understanding of these core components so that you can go back to your programs and implement them effectively. So during the breakouts today, we're going to use this standard logic model, and you're going to work through each segment to basically create a draft logic model that you can take away from this from this training to support you as you move forward, either in your learning or in your programs. And so one thing I want to point to here is just these arrows here. I know they're small, but this is sort of what I was referring to when I was discussing the fact that each segment of the logic model should flow into the next. You have your overarching goal, and then you have the resources that should then flow directly into activities, then into outputs, and then into outcomes. We're going to discuss each segment of the logic model at more at length later on in the training, but just to go a little bit deeper into the overall framework, one way to think about a standard logic model is a series of if-then statements. If you have these resources, things like staff, volunteers, time, money, then you will complete these activities, educating, facilitating, doing policy development, counseling. And if you're able to complete these activities, then these outputs will be accomplished. So you'll have X amount of sessions, you'll reach a certain number of individuals, and you will have a certain number of potential products that you have created, and so on into your outcomes. It is a chain of events that is really demonstrating how a program is going to achieve its desired goals. So this is a little bit more detail. And then of course, we'll go into each segment one by one to sort of break down what should be included in each segment, and you all will practice in breakout groups. Okay, so why do we use a logic model? A lot of you all touched on these reasonings when you shared why you wanted to come to the training today. We want to make sure that we have accountability, that we're accountable to our clients, to the communities that we serve, funders, to the staff, and to ourselves, right? We want to make sure that we're able to adequately promote the program. We have clarity on what we're doing, what we have, and what we hope to achieve. We want to build consensus, whether it be within our organization or with outside individuals who may be invested in our organization, whether it be grant makers or funders or even individual donors. We want to be able to compete for funds funds. Oftentimes, a lot of organizations that I know, they're creating logic models for the first time because they want to apply for grants. And so it is really important and can be a really helpful tool when you are applying for grants for the first time and want to provide clarity to the funder. It helps describe the program. It supports monitoring and evaluation. And of course, it supports overall program planning and improvement. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the goal. That is the goal in the logic model is the overall purpose of your program. This is an overarching statement that really just states what you hope to achieve. It doesn't have to be too detailed, but as we know, we want to make sure that we're encompassing everything that our program is doing. So similar to the way a mission statement encompasses everything that an organization hopes to achieve, the goal in the logic model should encompass everything that you hope to achieve for your program, the overarching goal. It should be measurable and within the capacity of your organization to deliver. And it serves as a frame for all of the elements of the logic model that follow. So it's a frame for the resources you have, the activities you do, the outputs and the outcomes. And of course, it reflects organizational priorities. And so different programs are gonna have different goals, of course. And some examples of some goals that you might see on a logic model are youth are able to gain and sustain employment and housing. That's a very simple sentence, but as we know, especially with the populations that you all are serving, that can be really, really difficult to attain. So we want to make sure that our goal is overarching, but that it relates back to the outcomes and the outputs so that we're clear, this is why we're doing this, and this is why we're measuring these specific items. Another example is that youth receive a high school diploma and are pursuing post-secondary education. If you have a program that's a little bit more education focused, this may be a goal for you. And your program may have multiple goals, but we want to make sure that our goal statement is clear and succinct. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about resources. So resources are essentially telling you what your organizational capacity is. Another word that you may see for resources are inputs, but they're essentially the same thing. They're what you're using to implement your activities and reach your overarching goal. Some example of resources are money, staff, volunteers, curriculums, facilities that you may have to house youth or to hold programming, technology that you use such as Zoom, and really fleshing out your resources. This can be a way and a tool for thinking about your organization's overarching needs. A lot of times we want to hold courses or we want to have, we have advocacy goals that we want to hit, but we're not necessarily thinking about what it requires to hit those goals and actually work towards that, right? Things like that are simple, such as books, curriculums, having the appropriate facilitators. Those are all going to be the resources that you use to actually implement the courses or the one-on-one coaching that you want to provide to the clients that you serve. Okay. So now we're going to get into activities. Activities are essentially, what are you going to do, right? They are the actions needed to implement your programming. Overall, in this section, we want clarity on what the program is going to be doing with the resources. So if you have something like a curriculum, or if you have staff, if you have facilitators, you want to be clear in the activities section of the logic model, what you're using them for. Are you using them to educate? Are you using them to counsel? Are you using them to conduct workshops or develop policies, right? And so some examples of different activities that you may do could be one-on-one coaching, GED courses that you provide to youth, housing and subsidy programs that you may have, outreach programs, food subsidy programs. And these, by listing this out, this can sort of be a baseline for a detailed work plan as to how you're actually going to implement the activities, but the how is not included in the logic model. You're really just talking about what it is that you're going to be doing. A lot of folks, they start off when they're doing the activities by just listing out all of their services and saying, hey, these are all the things that we provide to the different populations that we serve, and getting clear on this is what we intend to do. That oftentimes can be a really good starting place for folks, because if you're confused about anything else, you know what you're doing and what you intend to do with the population. And so you can oftentimes work backwards towards the resources that you need to figure out what resources you'll need, and then move into the outputs and the outcomes. All right. So now we're going to do a quick breakout group activity. If you all recall, in your reminder email, you received a link to a Google document that is essentially a blank template of the standard logic model. And what I'd like you to do is to work together to spend the next 10 minutes to create a goal, list some resources, and some activities. This can be for an existing program that you already have. It can be for something that's completely made up, but it is up to you. You all can decide that as a group. Myself and Sarah will be going from each rotating to different breakout groups to support you and answer any questions you may have. And Anna has shared the link to that logic model template in the chat. So if you select that link, what you can do is download it, or if you use Google Suite, then you can just make a copy of it and just start editing it in real time, and use that as we go through our breakout groups today. All right. I don't see any questions in the chat. So I think, Anna, we're ready to hop into our breakout groups. Looks like folks are back. All right, so can anyone unmute and talk a little bit about what you decided on and your process? How did that feel?
I can go. It was good. It was definitely informative. You kind of try to work it out as a group to kind of figure out where things go and how the process works, and just choosing one person's organization to focus on. So that was cool.
Awesome. What was your goal?
So the goal, oh, did I run it? Sorry. Okay. To stabilize youth in order to transition them to the next stage of their life. So just kind of making sure they're stable and able to kind of move on to whatever they choose to in the future. The resources would be staff and time and funding, landlords and schools and counselors and training programs. The activities would be case management, counseling, and advocacy. The outputs were obviously quantitative, so the number of youth who are housed, having a certain number of youth that were housed, or a certain number of youth who graduate.
I'm actually gonna pause you right there because we haven't gotten there yet, but
sorry.
points for overachieving. That was awesome, especially with 10 minutes. So yeah, sounds like you all have some a really great goal, something that's measurable. And yeah, you all are gonna be a little bit ahead for the outputs and outcomes breakout group, but great start.
Thank you.
Anyone else wanna unmute?
Sure, I took notes for our group. We basically wanted to, I guess it was a hypothetical at the end of the day, but we were saying it would be cool if it could be something that we are dealing with or had to deal with. So we came up with like identifying a new space for like a youth-centered learning program. And then we did pretty much just got to resources. Okay. And then we really had like a minute for activities, but the resources were a portion of our next fiscal year budget and grant opportunities that are existing or new, and private donations and staffing. So identifying like a committee with leadership, finance, staff, young people, and and then other resources are community and government partnerships and stakeholders.
Awesome. Okay. You'll have some more time in the second breakout group. It'll be 15 minutes for the activity. So you'll have some time. You'll be with the same individuals for the breakout group, and you'll be able to fill in a little bit of those activities. Thank you.
for, except that we didn't come up with, we didn't pick one, we chose one of our team members' organization and goals. And so our goal was to increase access to healthy food in an area that only has one Whole Foods or a Star Market. And so our resources include a community room, personnel to run the program, money, volunteers, research to survey communities in need, delivery trucks, flyers, word of mouth, and social media. And then we got to one of our activities, which was community rooms are used as a distribution site. So that's kind of where we left off, but we're excited.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. And one more group.
I can read out for our group, unless Pamela or Mary, if you'd like to read out what we talked about. We actually, our example comes from a program that Pamela is currently developing with her organization. And the goal of the program is to provide a safe place for youth to go in the summer. It's a 4-hour sort of program that happens, I guess, is it daily, Pamela, or? Well, so the resources we discussed, we kind of work backwards. We first identified activities, which included team building games, skills and drill sports, and health and wellness workshops. And they also provide food during that 4-hour period of time. And then from there, we kind of work backwards to what the resources that would be needed. So we identified staff, including 5 coaches, a first aid staff. We identified space as obviously a resource that we would need, supplies like sports equipment, funding. Is there anything else I'm leaving out, Mary or Pamela or anyone else from our group?
No.
We mentioned the snack budget.
Yeah.
What was that? Sorry.
The snack budget for the kids, for the youth. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And this event is also 2 days a week.
Okay. Awesome. So that's that time period. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You all are off to a great start. And yeah, anyone have any questions? We have a little bit of extra time before we go on our break. Just wanted to see if there are any lingering questions before we take a break for about 10 minutes.
I do have a question, actually. So I'm wondering if since we went backwards in my group and started with activities, is there a specific, or is there a better process, but depending on what kind of question or goal you're working with?
No, I wouldn't say there's a better process. I think it really depends on the organization and where you are with your program. A lot of organizations that are just starting off, they find it easier to start off actually with the outcomes because they know the changes that they want to see. And so they work backwards from there. But that can be a little bit difficult if you're in an organization that's been around for a while. So it's really, I think, depends on the community that you're working with, the staff, and sort of just like the culture of the organization. So I never say like there's any one way to do a logic model. I think one of the biggest things is just making sure that each segment correlates to the next. So like I said before, you have the resources that go into the activities directly, and then the activities that relate directly to the outputs, and then the outputs directly to the outcomes. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
I see Deandra.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. I just had a quick question. This is so far has been really great, so thank you. I was just wondering at the end, will you show like visuals of like different logic models, like from different ones, just to get like kind of a view of like how other organizations are placing them? I'm sorry, I'm a real visual person, so
no problem. Yeah, I totally get that. So we're for the training, we're keeping it standard, but
Yeah.
this partner spotlight with More Than Words, I think you guys are going to be really excited because their logic model does not look like the standard logic model.
Yeah.
It's really cool. It's very like, if you're a visual person, you'll love it. It's like super branded. It's beautiful. I just think it's stunning. So you'll be able to see another example with More Than Words' partner spotlight in a bit.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? I believe the recording is going to be sent out. Is it going to be today or sometime this week, Anna or Sarah?
So we will post it to the OWD website. So tomorrow I'll send out an email with kind of links to all of that. It'll probably take me a couple of probably about a week to get all that information up on the website. But we'll send you the slides tomorrow with some additional resources. So you can, if you're feeling like really in the mode to just jump into this, you'll be able to hit the ground running.
All right, and with that, we'll take a 10-minute break and let's come back at 9, or I guess at 10. I'm in central time. So let's come back in 10 minutes. Okay, hopefully everyone is back from the break. So before we dive into the outputs and outcomes in a logic model, we're going to take some time to discuss results-based accountability, also known as RBA. Results-based accountability is, sorry, my slide is not, oh, there we go. All right, results-based accountability is a way of thinking and taking action to improve conditions of well-being. It is a very extensive philosophy that is used across industries and different types of organizations to do things like strategic planning, setting KPIs. But for the purposes of our training today, we're going to use RBA to help us determine the program metrics that we want to use and put in our logic models. In other words, we're going to use 3 components of results-based accountability in order to set up our outputs and our outcomes. RBA and logic models are completely complementary, and RBA goes directly to that identification of different performance measures and really can be a starting point for using your performance measures to actually improve your performance and track your performance as well. So RBA is really great at helping groups really surface different challenges and in particular, any assumptions that they have when it comes to their programming and their intended outcomes. It also helps you identify any barriers to innovation. It helps build collaboration and consensus. And it really uses data and transparency to ensure accountability. As I mentioned earlier in the training, logic models, a big reason why we do them is for accountability. And that is another reason why people use results-based accountability is to make sure that they are being accountable to themselves, to their clients, to their funders, and all the individuals that are invested in their success. All right, so the 3 components of results-based accountability that we're going to use in our logic models are these 3 questions. How much did we do? How well did we do it? And is anyone better off? The reason why we want to be able to answer these questions is in creating the metrics that answer these 3 questions, we are essentially creating our outputs and our outcomes. Okay, so I'm just going to repeat that just to make sure it's clear because I know it can be a little bit confusing, but you will create metrics that answer these 3 questions. And in doing so, you will be able to have your outputs and your outcomes. These 3 questions really help us get the most out of our outputs and our outcomes and gain clarity. So the first question, how much did we do? That is really going to be firmly in the output section of your logic model. This is where we talk about what we provided and who we served. So an example of a metric that answers the question, how much did we do, is us tracking the number of trainings that we provided, the number of youth that we served, and potentially the number of coaching sessions that we provided. How well did we do is a little bit ambiguous. It can be in the output section or the outcome section. It's very dependent on the actual metric that you create and how long it may take to achieve that. So an example of a metric that answers the question, how well did we do, is measuring the % of youth that are satisfied with programming. So when you're asking for satisfaction, that can be an output if it is a indirect correlation to what has happened in an activity. So for example, if you are actually holding a set of courses in order for young people to be career ready, you may do a survey at the end and ask the youth, were you satisfied with the course that you took? Give us some feedback, right? And those things are going to be in your output section, because you're asking them as a direct result of the programming at the end of the program. However, things that may take a little bit longer to develop, things that are ambiguous, things like, what behaviors did you change? That is going to be in the outcomes section. And so things that may take time to develop, maybe things that happen like 3 months or 6 months after programming has technically completed, those are things that are going to be in your outcome section. So outputs and outcomes, I'm going to dive into them a little bit more, but for the purposes of the results-based accountability, just know that when you're creating metrics for how well did we do, that can be an output or an outcome depending on the time. And finally, the third question that you want to answer is anyone better off? When you're answering the question, is anyone better off? The metrics that you create are going to be metrics that you're going to put in your outcomes section of your logic model. An example of that is the % of youth that report an increase in knowledge. And the reason why this is an outcome section is because at the end of a program, it takes time for youth, for youth to know whether or not they've gained knowledge, right? Or for them to demonstrate that they've gained knowledge. This is something that takes a little bit longer to develop. So this could be a short-term outcome, but it's not necessarily a direct impact of the activity that you did. So for example, if we are having, I'll use the same example of career classes, career development courses, we may, and how much did we do, count the number of courses that we provided, the number of youth that we served through those courses. How well did we do? We'll ask, how satisfied were you with the course that you just attended? And then, is anyone better off? We want to know, what is the knowledge or skill gain that you got out of that course? So for example, do you know how to write a resume now? Do you know how to write a cover letter now? That's not something that's necessarily going to happen right after you do one class, but it's something that you can practice and learn over time, and that's a little bit longer term than an output. Okay. So just to get into the meat of outputs, outputs again are deliverables. They are the direct products of the work your program does. So just to go back to what I've been saying, the output should be directly correlated to the activities that you have listed in your logic model. So if you are having courses, you want to measure the amount of courses that you had, the amount of unique youth that attended those courses. If you are, providing jobs, you want to say how many jobs you provided, the number of youth that you employed. These are often expressed in terms of the size and scope of your services. So if your activities are your services, the outputs are the amount of services that you actually provided, size and scope. And then the outputs contribute directly to your outcomes. And then again, the RBA questions that are going to help you determine your outputs are going to be, how much did we do and how well did we do it? Okay. Answering those questions and by creating metrics are going to help you create your outputs. Now for outcomes, outcomes are the changes that occur for individuals, groups, organizations, systems, or communities as a result of the program. As you'll see on the left-hand side, I've split them up from short-term, medium-term, and long-term. These are the things that are directly hitting our goal, right? So things like knowledge gain, awareness, attitude, these are things that we can see, maybe 3 to 6 months after a program has ended. But to really see if someone's actions and behaviors have changed, that might take a little bit longer. So that'll be medium term. And things like actual change in your quality of life, those take even longer to really observe and to really manifest. So we consider those to be long term. So these outcomes are describing what program success looks like. they're realistic and measurable, they constitute what you will be held accountable for, and the RBA questions that you'll use to determine your outcomes are going to be how well did we do and is anyone better off? Again, we're thinking about knowledge gain, skill gain, change in the quality of life. So some examples of outcomes that you may have may be the percent of youth that have completed their high school diploma or gotten an equivalency, youth that are enrolled in post-secondary education, youth that end up completing their post-secondary education, youth that may have been employed for 6 months or more, youth that have been employed and have gotten a raise or who have gotten a promotion at that employer. Those are things that are, you've provided them the courses, they were satisfied with the courses, and then they got that knowledge gain and applied it to their life, and you see those longer term outcomes. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to hand it over to More Than Words for the partner spotlight. Ashley, feel free to unmute and talk a little bit about More Than Words process of creating the current logic model that you have, how you came up with your baseline metrics, and how you track progress towards those goals. I'll turn it over to you, Ashley. And let me know when you want me to change the slide.
Thank you, Naomi. Yeah, go ahead and change the slide. We can go ahead and start off. So what you see all in front of you is one of 4 layers of our logic model. We started off with a very standard logic model many years ago, and we just felt that it didn't really help us onboard new staff in terms of understanding all the components within our organization and what each of those departments do within our organization. So it was really hard to really teach and help learn our organization as we onboarded. And so this is actually a new version that we just started rolling out about a year now, and we feel that it's been very helpful to just really visualize our organization and how each department really contributes to the overall long-term outcomes that we want our youth to gain. So this is what we call our first layer, which is who we are as an organization. So if you think about it, these could be those resources, right? So all of these departments that we're utilizing to make sure that they contribute to those 3 main outcomes that you see. So our resources are our UJOB, so that encompasses our youth development team. We have our business job, and they encompass those who we call our business training managers, which do the job coaching for our youth. And then we also have our career services department, which supports education and employment goals for our youth who are in our program. So those are our main departments. And then our additional resources that we have are the 2 departments in the bottom, which is our advocacy and community engagement and our infrastructure. So those 2 just really help to greatly improve the TOP's ability to operate within our organization. So this is our first layer. So it really just focuses on those resources, and each layer you'll see, we are very we want to make sure that our 3 outcomes that we really are long-term outcomes are always visually seen. So those are the success after More Than Words. So we want to make sure that our youth are employed and sustain their jobs and get at least paid $15 an hour plus benefits, are able to complete post-secondary education, and are productive in their life for 30 hours or more a week. And so productivity, in the way that we measure that, is either school and or work. So it's a combination of both. So each layer that you see, we just want to make sure that those 3 outcomes are always very prevalent visually. So the second layer really focuses on those activities that each of those departments really do. It doesn't encompass all of the activities that each of those departments do, but these are very high level ones that we feel drive those outcomes. So as you can see, each of those departments have all of those activities that are listed. And so these are the activities that they focus. And then we'll dive deeper into kind of how we really engage our staff within these departments to really focus on like those activities and their outcomes within each of those departments. I can go over a couple of them. I know there's like a lot of words on the page. Just to give you some examples, for our U job, which is like mentioned, is our youth development team. So the activities that they really highlight in are weekly check-ins, making sure that they are checking in with our youth at least once a week while they're in the program. Collateral communication, so making sure that they are reaching out to their network outside of the walls of More Than Words, making sure that they're bringing them in terms of how youth are doing in our program. And then our weekly youth time and professional development workshops. So making sure that we are facilitating those spaces to make sure that our youth gain those soft skills that they need in order to be successful after More Than Words. And the community building aspect of making sure that our youth are engaging in conversations, getting to know one another. So those are just some like high level activities that that department specifically, and then we highlight that every other department does as well. Our third layer is what we call, why do we think that it works? Within our organization, there are different, we call pods, so different levels that our youth get promoted. And so we have our trainees, our associates, partners, and senior partners. And ultimately, once they finish our program in our program about 6 to 12 months, then they become graduates. And they are within our graduates for about 2 years. And so what you see in front of you are those short-term outcomes that we want our youth to be able to gain before they transition on next to the level of our organization. So, for example, trainees, they wanted to make sure that they get to know who their youth development manager are, making sure that they're able to identify those things that they need to put in place, those life essential things that they need to put in place. And on the opposite end of our business job, they want to make sure that they gain those people skills, being able to be dependable, making sure that they're showing up on work on time and that they are there present. And so these are just some of the short-term outcomes that we're hoping that they will gain and be successful before they continue on into our program. And so that's what you see in front of you in each of those sections within those different levels of the organization, because we're hoping that as they gain these short-term outcomes, as they're gaining these skills, that's what will lead to those long-term outcomes that we really want to focus on. And then lastly, this is how we know that it's working. These are our measurable indicators. Each department has those to see how youth are doing in terms of progressing through their portion of their model successfully. So for example, our youth development team, they know that they're reaching their short-term outcomes if youth are attending work and school, because some of like their activities essentially was like checking in with youth in terms of how school was going, those weekly check-ins. So if they're doing those activities, we're hoping like as youth gain the skills and reach those short-term outcomes, that they can be successful in attending school. And so if 75% of our youth are attending, that means that we're doing well in terms of reaching that goal. And so with these, although these aren't of course like, they're not exhaustive of everything that the department does, it gives the department a high level guidance on what numbers are most important to show that their portion of the work is working effectively. And so this is also a great opportunity for them to kind of problem solve if they may not be hitting the numbers, kind of taking a look back in terms of their programming. And so we can actually now probably take a look at how we kind of look at each department in terms of like their own logic model. So this is like for the entire organization. And so it's been really helpful to really train our staff and getting to know what our program framework is, especially just having those floor layers, because we know logic models can be overwhelming. And so when we do this, we still want to make sure that logic models and like the framework of the program is still very top priority, because we really feel that it's important that data is in front of them in order to strategically plan. So one way that we do that, maybe you could go to the next slide. So this is the department level logic model. So we have this for currently right now our youth development team and our career service team. And then we're working on one for like our business job portion of the organization. So here you can see we tackle each of like the activities and also those like short-term outcomes. So the very first portion we focus on like, how did we do on onboarding and retaining youth? Like, how are we doing in making sure that our youth are starting off strong, are still engaging in the program, and making sure that we're retaining them. And like those activities, like those check-ins, like making sure that we are connecting with youth is the second portion. So those are like the activities, and we want to make sure that we are connecting with our youth. And if those check-ins are not to those measurable indicators that the department chooses, feels is a level that they should be checking in with youth, kind of having conversations of why that may not happen. Why did we not check in with X amount of youth this month? It could be maybe it's the capacity of staff, or maybe it was because there is something that happened within the organization, or there's various variables why something may not get accomplished. So it gives really the staff the opportunity to reflect in terms of how are they doing in terms within their department, and how are they being successful of reaching those outcomes and those goals that they set out to do as an organization. So I won't cover every single section, but this is essentially what we do every single month. We reflect on previous data from the month. We take about 30 minutes, doesn't take a long time to reflect. Pulling together this template, once you have a template, it becomes easier just to input all of the data, but pulling all of the data takes maybe a max of 3 hours and 30 minutes to have like that conversation with staff. And it's really helpful because it tells a fuller story of your outcomes and of the goals that you set out. And we don't have like a secret sauce or a secret formula of how we create these goals, because it's definitely a testing and learning based on like, we pull like historical data, we have conversations with like staff of like what realistic goals and like those measurable indicators, like what is realistic based on the capacity that you have on your staff, based on the capacity of the input and output of like how youth are coming in and out of the building. So even having these conversations, we're also able to reflect on, are these goals really reflective of the capacity that we can have as a staff? And so the goals that you all saw, the logic model, the outputs, we even during COVID, we kind of had to take a step back and readjust our goals, just because we know that we're in a different time period, there's different capacities and different ways that we have to restructure our programming. So it's a ever-changing thing, which is pretty cool, I think, about logic models, because it's an opportunity for you to reflect on how your organization is doing and where you may need a pivot and where there can be growth. So I really enjoy logic models, and I feel like our teams have definitely come to really engage in these conversations about their own data and just like how their logic model works within each of their departments.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I appreciate you sharing these logic models and talking about the experience at More Than Words, and especially even just talking about how things kind of shifted and were reassessed during COVID. I'm going to invite everyone, if you have any questions or just want to know a little bit more about the experience that More Than Words kind of went through, please feel free to unmute yourself and engage with Ashley. We are definitely ahead of schedule, so we do have some time to spend taking questions.
Actually, can you go back to the first slide? And 'cause I just wanted to see, like, because I think it's really cool how you laid out your goals and then like how it's expanded on like as you go through like the layers. So I think that's like really dope.
Thank you. Yeah, we felt that it was really helpful to visually see it in this way rather than a standard model.
Yeah.
That was the first iteration, and then the second iteration was a little bit more visual, but it didn't have as much depth in terms of what really we all did as an organization. And I know, as many of you all, like, there's probably so many different pieces of your organization, and trying to share that can sometimes be a challenge. So we feel like with this there's enough depth, but it's also not exhausting to see. So we found like this was a pretty good middle ground for us.
I just like how it builds upon each other. Like even you go to the second slide, you go into more depth, so then it doesn't become overwhelming. And then you have like all the goals and like overarching goals laid out. So I think that's amazing.
Thank you.
Actually, one of the things I really like about More Than Words' model is that your outcomes are measurable. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, you know, how the organization sort of builds in follow-up services or activities so that they can capture some of this information. You know, we know that like youth, you know, it's a logic models kind of give us the impression that there's a linear progression that youth go through when they enter a program, but we all know that, you know, people can kind of zigzag in and out of programs. And so could you talk a little bit about, you know, you can have these outcomes are in some way, some of them depending on, you know, like if a youth is going kind of straight through the program to a job versus a youth going kind of in and out of the program, you know, you have to have a way of capturing those outcomes in a longer time scale, given that, you know, that it's not always a linear progression. So can you talk a little bit about follow-up activities that allow you to capture these more longer term outcomes?
Yeah, definitely. So all of our activities are essentially measurable. And so they're always, what we do is we create what we call a dashboard. And so each department is able to see all of their activities and all of their short-term outcomes in terms of how are they doing. And so even up to like those activities, those short-term outcomes, we measure those. So for example, I guess we could talk about like sustaining a job that pays at least 15 hours or more and benefits. While they're in the program, we want to make sure that they're gaining those skills in order for them to be successful and keep employment. So we have goals set out in terms of expectations of they need to be 90% present and they have to be 90% on time. And so we capture that on what we call a daily shift report. So every shift that they attend, essentially we're capturing that data to see how are they doing in terms of their dependability at a job, because we feel that if they're able to be there 90% of the time, they've created that habit forming skill in order for them to retain employment after More Than Words. And so that's just one way that we capture it while they're here, alongside of like other skills that they are gaining, competencies that they are gaining. And within our grad program, once they've completed our model, they are in our grad program for 2 years, which they receive those those employment services and support. And even then, we also track that data in terms of where are they employed, how long have they been employed there, how many hours are they working, what is the pay, and what are the benefits. So essentially we track all of that data, and we track to see who has been employed and if those who have been employed for more than 6 months or more. And so essentially that's kind of like how we track the data while they're in our program, and ultimately like after they've left More Than Words, for at least those 2 years while they're in our program is when we track that. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much. That's really helpful.
Anyone else have any thoughts or questions for Ashley?
Yeah, I just want to say I think it's a great way for leadership staff and all staff involved in projects to stay accountable. I like that you do it month after month, because sometimes like these things are put into place and then people pay attention to it for a little while or a couple months and then they kind of just forget about them. But I think like that it's continuously revisited month after month, is even, and not like overwhelmingly, like it doesn't need, like you said, it doesn't need to be like 3 hours of people's time. If it's just short and digestible, it can be kind of consistent, and that's important. So no question, I just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
Ashley, so one of the things I think you guys had shared is that this is something you also use kind of to integrate with the young people participating in your program, to kind of get buy-in from them towards these outcomes as well. I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit, because I think that's a really unique element of More Than Words, that it's not just like management or the directors looking at this, that it's really something that is part of like the mission and values of the organization at all levels.
Yeah, definitely. For our youth, it's not, I don't think they don't see these four layers. I think with our youth, we really focus on those short-term outcomes, because as our youth progress through our model, there's also like an incentive of increased pay. And so as they are learning like those skills that they need to accomplish and those goals that they need to meet at each level of their progression, it really helps incentivize them and encourage them of like, okay, this is what I need to get done and this is what I need to reach in order to progress through this model. And so the short-term outcomes layer is what youth visually see in terms of what is it that they need to do in order to continue on through our model. So they see it first when they like start our programming, and then they revisit that at each level that they are progressing through. So they like walk through it with their youth development manager, saying like, okay, did you accomplish all of these goals? These are the goals that you still need to work on. And then as they progress, they just kind of revisit that over and over time again, so they know right off the bat what is the expectations, and like what are those goals that we're aiming for. So it's a really good tool that staff and both youth have really enjoyed being able to utilize.
I think that's such a cool way of doing it, to really like have that clear connection between like the shorter term goals and like what you're ultimately trying to achieve as an organization. Really neat.
Any other thoughts or questions for Ashley? All right. So since we are also a little bit ahead of schedule, I'm just going to take a pause to see. I know that was a lot of information, talked about results-based accountability, outputs, outcomes, and then we heard from Ashley. are there any questions about the content that we've discussed so far? Anything on the logic model, results-based accountability, anything that you'd like clarification on? Don't see anything in the chat. Okay, so what I'll do, I'm gonna move on and we're gonna talk a little bit about creating baseline metrics. And I wanted to take some time to discuss this because this can be something that's really difficult for organizations, especially if you are doing your program for the first time. So baseline metrics are metrics that are measured at a specific time to provide a frame of reference for future performance. Oftentimes when programs are just starting up or they're doing a logic model for the first time or doing an evaluation for the first time, they're creating these metrics, right? They're using the results-based accountability, they're creating their outcomes and their outputs, but they don't know exactly how to level set, essentially, right? They don't know if they should shoot for the stars or if they should be a little bit more realistic in the amount of youth that they plan to serve or the amount of classes that they plan to provide. And so I just want to talk about some things that you should consider when you want to create some appropriate baseline metrics. And you'll recognize some of these because Ashley discussed More Than Words doing this as they set their metrics in their org-wide logic model. So one of the things you want to do is look at past data. This can be formal data that you've collected formally and done reports on, but it can also be really informal. You can have conversations with staff, you can have conversations with clients and individuals in the community to get a sense of what's happening, how many folks are interested, who's really going to be your target population if you're going to be able to hit the number of individuals that you want to serve and hit those outcomes. Then you want to look at best practices. Again, this can be in formal research papers or in informal papers, practice papers. You want to consider what's happening in the field and look at outside research. Again, doesn't have to be super academic, but look to your peers, see what blogs they're writing, see what they're sharing, what are the areas of improvement that they're articulating, what are areas that they feel they're doing really well in, and how can you sort of look to them to level set for yourself. Consider your population. As was mentioned, it can be really hard to serve youth who are at the intersection of homelessness and workforce development. They are served by many different systems and likely served by many different organizations. And they're at the intersection of a lot of different issues such as juvenile justice, public health, things like that. And so you really want to consider what they're going through, what they really will be able to show up for. And again, look to your peers and partner organizations to understand the population. Don't work in a silo. Consider what your other goals are and what you really have the capacity for, and contextualize appropriately. We heard Ashley talk about More Than Words shifting things because of COVID, and that's totally appropriate. So if you have maybe planned to reach 100 youth and then something happens, for example, COVID, it's okay to adjust your baseline metrics to be a little bit lower or maybe to be a little bit higher, right? Because there's an increased need. So make sure you contextualize appropriately. And the reason we do this is to make sure that we're setting realistic and feasible expectations. It can be really hard to set some expectations, and then when you don't necessarily hit those goals, it can feel like the program is a failure or something's wrong with the program, but it could just be that the metrics were a little bit inappropriate, a little bit too high. And sometimes there are, again, like outside factors, external factors that can impact the program that have nothing to do with our activities, our resources, our staff. They're just things that are outside of our control. So some challenges that you all may face are self-reporting and self-assessment. That's valuable, but it's not the only way to assess your goals. A lot of times this goes hand in hand with youth being assessed often, right? They're going to school, they're taking exams, they are being assessed by different organizations because organizations want to do all their different evaluations. They're constantly being asked to participate in surveys, interviews, focus groups, and things like that. And so a lot of times that can mean that the self-reporting and the self-assessment is not actually because they're over-assessed. It becomes less valuable because the youth are just not really engaged in that process. and they're sort of just there to be there, or they feel like, you know, you're asking us the same questions, but we don't see any of the changes. We don't see any of the impact on our end. And so that's a challenge. It's not necessarily something you can completely solve for. But again, doing some of the things like talking to your peers, not working in silos, reading research that's available to you can mean that you're not over assessing the youth and that you're really capitalizing on the time that you have with them. You know that there can be limitations with working with a population that is very transient, they're moving a lot, they don't necessarily have stable homes, and so that it can be hard to reach youth for assessment and programming. It can be really difficult to level set if you don't have the ability to do a pilot program. And then of course you need the time and resources, right, the staff, to continuously track metrics. So I'm going to pose a question to the group, and anyone can unmute and just share, you know, what has been your experience in the past creating baseline metrics? What have you done? What are some of the challenges that your organization has faced? Any thoughts on baseline metrics or even questions?
I'll go. You know, for us, I think baseline metrics are we've been doing them for a long time, and they've been particularly challenging during the COVID pandemic. So in the last 2 years, we've let ourselves be more flexible, like throughout the year, saying like, okay, like we think we could do this, but if 6 months later, that's really not the case, we can't be as hard on ourselves as we were in past years, because there's so much unpredictability. But within the last like 6-9 months, obviously trying to like no longer use that as like an excuse, but still, you know, trying to get back to where we are predicting, you know, more effectively. So.
I'm curious what you think made a difference in you being able to predict things more effectively. It's like anything in particular you think sort of supported the staff?
Sorry, I didn't know my camera fell. You all were looking at my desk, I think. I just think that, you know, looking at the results throughout the pandemic helped us to, you know, set things that were more realistic, and definitely, you know, taking it like month by month versus just looking at it over a year span has been helpful, and finding compromise. So if something was 100 3 years ago, and the first year of the pandemic it was 50, looking to kind of like, in the most simple of like ways of talking about it, having it be 75 to say like, okay, like this is what it used to be, this is how 2020 went, let's kind of try to find that middle ground. And you know, just communicating to, you know, leadership to say, you know, this could change, but to a certain point, like throughout the year, like at a certain point in the year, like you have to stick to what you know, reset.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing your experience. Anyone else want to talk about baseline metrics?
I would say, like, similarly to what Jonathan was sharing, was just like, sometimes I think it like depends on like the scope of your organization, and then like there are just some variables of things that you can't predict. So like when I think about when I was using like more frequently, it was like I was working in the school system, but it was a hybrid situation because I was working directly for the school, and then like we also were working for central office. So even if there were some goals that we had in mind for the current school years, and if programmings were great, but if funding changed or if leadership changed, then that means that direction would end up changing. So that also sometimes play a big role in like being able to project like realistic like goals, right? Like for the following year, especially like if you were really successful towards the end. So I guess like your output, your impact and output component. But it's, I don't know, sometimes I think it's easier when you work with a smaller organization because you can be more effective.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I might be able to speak from the funder's perspective. You know, one of the things that we look at when we're evaluating grant applications and programs, you know, we look to see how realistic the goals are. And it really is, like I was saying before, it's not, in some cases, you know, you might have funding agencies that provide kind of a baseline metric. We want to see, you know, 75% of youth go on to complete a high or obtain their HiSET or GED. But in at least for our organization, we don't typically set those thresholds. We leave it up to the grantees to do that for us. But what we do is look at how realistic those goals are. And it could be, you know, we sort of look at based on the cost per participant that the organization is proposing and the goals, you know, we look to see if those things are in balance. If it doesn't seem in balance, you know, that kind of raises questions for us like, well, you know, if the program is being sort of thoughtful in how it's approaching the development of activities and sort of how those activities then lead into the impact that they're trying to achieve. So it does sort of, from our perspective, it's very important to see that programs are kind of have a process for devising those metrics so that we're sort of comfortable knowing that these metrics are achievable and that they match, you know, the funding request, the per capita cost, the outputs and activities that are being proposed.
Anyone else want to share before we move on? Just check the chat really quickly. Okay. Awesome. Thank you all. All right. So we actually have, if there are any lingering questions, go ahead and ask them now. If not, then we will head into our 10-minute break. So any questions about baseline metrics, results-based accountability, outputs and outcomes? Okay, so we'll head into a break, come back in 10 minutes. So at 10:56. And when we return, we will head into breakout groups and you will take some time to complete the outputs and outcomes portion of the logic model that you started earlier today. All right, thanks folks, see you in a bit. Okay, welcome back everyone. We are going to head into our breakout groups. And so just to reiterate, we are going to continue on with the logic models that we started in our first breakout groups. This time you're going to add to what you've already created and complete the outputs and the outcomes section of the logic model. We're going to give you 20 minutes to work together, and then we'll come back and debrief. As before, Sarah and I are going to be floating around to the breakout groups, answering any questions and supporting you as best we can. All right, so we had 3 groups this time around. Anyone want to volunteer to share some of the outputs and outcomes that you developed?
Yeah, we can go first. Hi, everyone. My name is Genesis Bautista. And I was in another group, but was fortunate enough to participate in the group that I was then placed in, which was awesome. And I am just pulling up our logic model. Okay, so this is, sorry, is that okay for me to do? I was
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
okay.
Yes.
So yeah, so this is what we kind of organized. Like I said, I was fortunate to jump into the group. So please, my group members, if you could, chime in if I'm missing anything. But really, we kind of altered it a little bit. I believe we started off with looking at like a youth center, and then after talking to Naomi, we kind of brought it a little more centered. So what we came up with was to improve the health and wellness within local neighborhoods. Didn't have specific, but let's say targeted neighborhoods that we may want to look at. For resources, we thought, really looking at the budget, so grant opportunities, new, existing, and private donation, looking at staffing, that includes the leadership, committees, finance, the youth themselves, and then community and government partnerships, as well as stakeholders. So really looking at all areas of who could be involved in this project, as well as who we would be serving, which is the youth and other members of the community. For our activities, so what do we plan on doing? We hope to kind of work on an ideal center that would kind of work on this specific health and wellness need. Really identifying the stakeholders and experts, because it is an area, I think, of expertise. So bringing in those professionals to really kind of run the show is, I think, a great kind of move. Creating the curriculum and list of workshops for the young adults, which would probably be in collaboration with the experts and partners. And then building in partners to conduct data analysis. I believe Ryan had mentioned that really looking at, there's colleges who are open to support in surveying or kind of data collection. So really looking at how can we, definitely build that part of the program. Outputs, so what we hope, what will be accomplished. So I know Naomi mentioned this is where the numbers come in. So we try to look at that, which is the number of youth enrolled. So how many youth do we plan on enrolling? The number of meals created. So if we're looking at this health and wellness, the different activities that we're doing, the number of workshops within the subgroup. So how many of each workshop would we do? If it's 2 a week of the nutrition, 3 a week of, health or mental health. So really looking at what does the kind of curriculum itself look like. And then the number of measurable data to show effectiveness or adjustments for future programming. So that's definitely helpful. And then outcomes would be, for short term is, again, this is, just kind of pretend, but 2 out of 3, hoping that 2 out of 3 youth would be able to create a health plan for themselves and their families, identifying their meal habits have changed. So really looking at how that program impacted them. The medium goals is having a network of former participants who will relay information of effectiveness of their prior experiences, and then long-term adjustments in community and health statistics, hopefully. So looking at obesity, diabetes, fitness, asthma rates, really all of the health aspects of communities that are currently being impacted and what that looks like if we did implement this program. Hopefully I did the group justice.
Thank you so much.
Nicely
Appreciate
done.
that. Anyone else from the group want to chime in? Love it. Love the emoticons.
Yeah, that was all encompassing.
Great job. You all are fabulous. All right.
I really like the use of some of the community data and long-term data as part of a way to collect that information, since it can be so challenging to get to have continued long-term follow-up. So looking at more creative ways to use existing data sources, I think was a really awesome idea.
I agree. All right. How about another group? Want to share? Feel free to share your screen.
I don't know, Patricia or Pamela, if I share my screen, or Tanya, would you like to walk through what we talked about through outcomes and outputs, outputs and outcomes?
I can read it if you want.
Sure. Okay.
If I can see it, okay. Okay.
Oh, are you able to see it? Let me.
Oh yeah, I thought you were still, I think a little bit, I think. Let me say, I do, I have horrible eyesight even with my glasses on. I can yeah.
Be able to zoom, yeah.
Yeah.
View.
I know, is it just me or does it, okay, that's much
There
better. Okay, so for, first of all, we talked about, the goal was to have a safe place for youth for summer to play, learn new recreational activities and develop healthy habits and socialize. So the resources that we would need would be staff, first aid, BPD for safety, a DJ, 5 coaches, interns. Another resource would be space, supplies, sports equipment, funding, budget for snacks, staff, marketing materials, partnerships, one of which would be the Hyde Park. That would be part of our pipeline. Activities, what we're going to do, team building games, going to serve food, skills and drill sports, health wellness workshops. The outputs would be the number of youth served in the number of workshops that were had. And then the outcomes, the short-term goal is the youth are satisfied and had fun. And the medium-term goal is youth return to school.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Anyone else from the team want to share or elaborate? I think you all did a really great job connecting each segment of the logic model. All right. We will have the final group share.
I will share my screen. Sorry, I like elevator music a lot. Okay, we didn't quite finish ours, partly too because one of our members had left and we were using their framework to like develop our logic model, and then we had to make some edits along the way because we were getting into the weeds. Okay, so the short of it is that for our resources, our goal is to increase access to healthy food in an area that only has one Whole Foods or Shar Market. Our resources include our community room, personnel to run the program, money, volunteers, research to survey communities in need, delivery trucks, which is Fair Food, that's the company that delivers it, and then flyers, so marketing, and then partner with local food pantries within the area to distribute bags. And so our activities included, community rooms will be used as distribution sites. We'll host distribution days at community partner sites, have volunteers distribute and advertise our services. We'll provide nutrition classes for our community members, advocate for students to increase, advocate for subsidies to increase healthy grocery markets in underserved communities. And then for some of our outputs, we just said that we'll identify 5 neighborhoods in Boston, partner with at least 5 community centers within the area and 5 schools. So because the bigger part of it is to kind of increase that access, and we didn't get to our goals. But ultimately, long-term goals that we'll like to see an increase of just healthy alternatives into the community. And then also like actually having access to more healthy grocery markets so that these individuals can have a healthier lifestyle and longer lifetime trajectory. Anything else want to add from the group?
Yeah, I think some of our other outputs that we didn't quite get to would just be things like number, similar to the other group, but number of like meals distributed and number of classes held, and things like that.
Amazing work. Thank you. Thank you so much. You all were wonderful today, and you got a lot done for only having, I think, 30, 45 minutes in groups, and it takes a lot longer to complete a logic model. So you all did really great work. I really hope this was helpful to you. I'm going to give some time and see if anyone, let me share my screen again.
Oh, let me stop sharing.
So any questions? I want to note that I did go around to each of the groups, and I just want to reiterate that when you're doing the outputs and the outcomes section, really lean on those results-based accountability questions. Answering those questions, the metrics that you create to answer those questions are going to fill out your outputs and outcomes segments. Those will really help you in thinking through metrics and then determining what you want your baseline to be. The other thing I will add is that when you're doing the activities and then moving on to outputs, that's a really key place. You want to be explicit about what your activities are and how they're linking to those outputs. One really good strategy is to go through each activity and then just create an output for that activity. Even if it's something that is mentioned multiple times, it's clear to have a direct linkage between the activity and what the output is going to be. And of course, you want to maintain that flow throughout the logic model, from the goal to the resources to the activities, the outputs, and then to the outcomes. All right. Any questions? Anything I can clarify in our last few moments together?
I had a question. We talked a little bit about kind of the timeline aspect in when you joined our group, which I know you said wasn't, super important for the outcomes piece, but is there kind of like an average, timeline, just thinking about the outcomes? Because, thinking about our group, if our main goal is to increase like longevity of life and overall, health of the community, I feel like those can be outcomes that take several years to measure.
Yeah.
So for a logic model, is it fine to have something that like you may not be able to measure for several years, or do you kind of want to keep it a little more? Okay.
Yeah, so with the outcomes, that's why you break it up into sort of short, medium, and long term, because you can, and some organizations do this, they'll be very explicit about what their short term is. So for example, if you're having an after school program and you want youth to be ready for school, then one of your short-term outcomes could be in 3 months or at the end of the summer, youth are prepared with A, B, and C. This percentage of youth feel like they're prepared and supportive to start the school year again, right? And then if you wanted to do something more medium term, you might check in with them, halfway into the school year. And if you wanted to do more long term, you might check in with them at the end of the school year to see how, in general, how the program supported them throughout their school year. This is going to vary depending on the industry, depending on the program. And this is where having conversations with other organizations, looking into practice papers, looking at the research is going to help you, because oftentimes people share from their experience how long it took for them to actually see those outcomes happen. So for you, you may say, hey, I think it's going to be 3 months, but you might find that a partner organization that did something similar, it actually took them 6 months, right? And so that's also going to help you think about your timeline just by looking at outside research and also looking at your program's past performance and past data.
Awesome, thank you.
I wonder, Naomi, is it also a little bit depending like what you're using those measures and benchmarks for? Like you might consider, I'm thinking like if it's for a grant, you might be looking at the term of that grant.
Absolutely.
But if it's for like community impact for an organization that's been around for 20 years, you might set some other outcomes that are a little bit more long-term because you now have the capacity to do those kind of longer term measures and have a community impact.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, that is absolutely spot on. You know, oftentimes when you have a grant, let's say it'll last for 5 years, you'll plan out the program. And so you can have metrics that you're not expecting to see until the end of that 5 years. And so those can also be your long-term metrics. You can have long-term metrics, things that you look at each year, and they kind of build on one another. So yeah, depending on the length of your program or your grant, or the actual sort of goal of the program, right? If you're looking at community impact, you may have a longer timeline, right? A lot of folks, when they do community impact, they're thinking 10 years, 15, 20 years. Any other questions? Let me check the chat. Okay. All right, so we are at the end of our time today. Thank you. Thank you so much to each and every one of you for joining, for participating, for engaging, for asking your questions. I really appreciate you being here. I know for some of you, this is your first time doing logic models, and it's not the easiest thing when you first try it, but I know that you all are gonna create something spectacular for your organization. So big thank you. Please, if you can, we do have some time since we're ending early, to take some time to complete that feedback survey. Anna has put the link to the survey in the chat. And then of course, you can register for any upcoming trainings at the link also provided in the chat by Anna. I believe there are 2 more trainings in this series, correct? Oh, 3 more?
2 topics, 3 times.
Okay, yeah, right. 2 topics, 3 more trainings, and you can find more information about that on the website owd.boston.gov/risingtogether. Yeah, if there's anyone who wants to kind of stick around, talk, I have some more time since we're ending early, but thank you again. I appreciate you all and have a wonderful week.